Tonight, authorities confirmed a major federal operation in a large U.S. city where dozens of victims were rescued from an extensive trafficking network.
4:52 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota, December 18th. Federal agents gathered in silence outside the Cedar Riverside district. Frost-covered windshield, breath hung in frozen clouds, no sirens, no flashing lights, just the quiet hum of diesel engines idling in pre-dawn darkness. Inside 12 unmarked vehicles sat 87 federal agents, FBI, DEA, ICE, Homeland Security Investigations, U.S. Marshals, all converging on a single address. The Somali Cultural and Diplomatic Services Office stood 4 stories tall on Cedar Avenue, polished granite facade, diplomatic seals etched into glass doors, the kind of building that demanded respect simply by existing. But respect was about to shatter. At 4:58 a.m., the final radio check crackled through encrypted channels. All teams green, assets in position, warrants verified. The operation had been 18 months in the making. What began as a routine financial audit had metastasized into something federal investigators never expected to find. Not in America, not hiding behind diplomatic credentials. If you want the full truth of what happened next, hit like so this story reaches more people who need to see it. The breach came at exactly 5:03 a.m. No warning knock, no negotiation. A battering ram struck the reinforced entrance with a crack that echoed down the empty street. Glass exploded inward. Agents poured through the opening like water through a broken dam. Flashlights cut through darkness. Boots thundered up staircases. Commands barked in English, Somali, Arabic. Federal agents, down on the ground, hands where we can see them. The building's first 2 floors looked exactly as expected. Reception area, cultural displays, framed photographs of humanitarian missions, certificates of appreciation from local officials. Everything that made the Somali Cultural and Diplomatic Services appear legitimate. Everything that had protected it for 12 years. But the 3rd floor told a different story. When agents breached the private office of Director Amina Hassan Yusuf, the air itself felt wrong. Too heavy, too still, like the room had been holding its breath for years. Behind a hand-carved mahogany desk imported from Mogadishu sat a leather case. Agents opened it without ceremony. $743,000 in cash, bundled in vacuum-sealed plastic, organized by denomination. In the desk's bottom drawer, wrapped in velvet cloth, lay 2 handguns, a Glock 19 with the serial number filed off, a Sig Sauer P226 with custom grip, neither registered, neither legal. And in a reinforced cabinet bolted to the floor, federal agents found 31 kilograms of methamphetamine, stamped with the 4-letter marking that made every agent in the room go silent, CJNG, Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, one of Mexico's most violent drug trafficking organizations, operating out of a diplomatic office in the heart of Minneapolis. This wasn't a cultural center. This was a distribution hub. Comment exposed below. If you believe the public deserves to know what happens when trust is weaponized, by 5:47 a.m., the building had been cleared. 7 individuals were in federal custody, but Amina Hassan Yusuf was not among them. Agents tore through every office, every closet, every hidden space. She had vanished. Financial forensics teams arrived as dawn broke over the Mississippi River. What they uncovered in the next 4 hours would expose a network so vast, so carefully constructed, that even seasoned federal investigators struggled to comprehend its scope. Amina's computer system was encrypted, military-grade protection, the kind narco-traffickers use when they know capture means life imprisonment. But encryption means nothing when the FBI's cyber action team gets involved. By 9:12 a.m., the walls came down. Spreadsheets materialized on screen. Years of financial movement flowing across borders like rivers finding the path of least resistance. Shell companies nested inside legitimate nonprofits. Wire transfers disguised as humanitarian aid. Donations that appeared on paper but never reached recipients. The numbers grew with each click. $4.7 million routed through the East African Relief Foundation, a charity that existed only as a P.O. box in Delaware. $11.2 million transferred via the Somali Youth Development Initiative, an organization with no staff, no office, no programs. $23.8 million moved through the Minneapolis Cultural Exchange Fund, registered as a 501c3, approved by the IRS, celebrated by local officials for community outreach. All of it fake. By 10:34 a.m., investigators had traced more than $186 million flowing through 37 shell organizations over 12 years. Money moving from Mexico through Minneapolis to offshore accounts in 3 countries. Every transaction carefully disguised as legitimate cultural programming or refugee assistance. The deeper agents dug, the clearer the truth became. Amina Hassan Yusuf had not simply committed fraud, she had built an empire using America's own systems as infrastructure. If this shocks you, hit like now so more people see how deeply these networks can penetrate. But money was only one river in a system. At 11:03 a.m., a forensic accountant named Rebecca Torres noticed something wrong in the payment records. Recurring transfers labeled Program Participant Transport Costs. Amounts too precise. Timing too regular. $8,400 every 11 days, for 3 years straight. She cross-referenced the dates against Coast Guard maritime logs. Her hands stopped moving across the keyboard. Every payment matched a cargo vessel departure from the port of Duluth. Torres pulled the shipping manifests. Legitimate freight company, registered cargo, nothing that would raise red flags at customs. But when she compared the vessel registration numbers against corporate ownership records, the pattern emerged. Every ship was owned by subsidiaries linked back to Amina's network, and the manifests listed one category of cargo that made the entire room fall silent. Cultural exchange participants, not freight, not supplies, people. By 12:47 p.m., federal investigators had identified 23 cargo vessel departures over 36 months. Each manifest listed between 40 and 180 exchange participants being transported for educational and cultural programming. But when agents contacted the listed destination organizations, not a single one existed. The addresses were vacant lots, the phone numbers were disconnected, the educational programs were ghosts. These weren't cultural exchanges, these were trafficking routes. At 1:15 p.m., an emergency alert hit every federal law enforcement network from Minneapolis to Washington, D.C. Maritime Tracking System had flagged a vessel that departed Duluth 19 hours earlier, the MV Northern Star, registered under Amina's corporate network. Destination listed as Halifax, Nova Scotia, but its actual heading was southeast, toward international waters, and according to intercepted communications, it was carrying 120 American children. Type yes below if you're ready to see what happened next. The Pentagon's Northern Command activated within 7 minutes. This was no longer an FBI case. This was a rescue operation, and the clock was ticking. At 1:22 p.m., U.S. Coast Guard Station Duluth scrambled 2 MH-60 Jayhawk helicopters. At 1:26 p.m., the destroyer USS Porter changed course from Lake Superior Patrol to intercept trajectory. At 1:31 p.m., a submarine operating beneath the surface received encrypted orders. Find the vessel, shadow it, prepare for forced boarding. By 2:04 p.m., satellite imagery had located the MV Northern Star 117 nautical miles from the U.S. maritime boundary. It was running dark, no navigation lights, no radio responses, pushing maximum speed toward the international line where American jurisdiction ended. Inside the Federal Operations Center in Minneapolis, screens glowed with real-time tracking data. Every agency represented, every resource mobilized. Special Agent Marcus Reeves, FBI Minneapolis Field Office, stood at the command table. 23 years in federal law enforcement. He'd seen trafficking operations before, but never one wrapped in diplomatic credentials. Never one this organized. "How long until they hit international waters?" he asked. The Coast Guard liaison checked the display. At current speed, 74 minutes. 74 minutes. After that, rescue became exponentially harder. Legal jurisdiction blurred, military rules of engagement changed, and 120 children disappeared into a network that had been operating in plain sight for over a decade. Reeves didn't hesitate. "All units execute. Secure those children. I don't care what it takes. If you believe our military and law enforcement deserve support when they risk everything, comment heroes below." At 2:38 p.m., the first Jayhawk helicopter reached visual range of the MV Northern Star. What they saw made every crew member's stomach tighten. The vessel was a modified cargo freighter, 340 feet long, reinforced hull, no windows on the lower decks. And on the upper observation deck, armed men in tactical gear, not crew members, not security, mercenaries. The pilot counted 14 visible hostiles, AK pattern rifle, at least 2 with RPG tubes. They weren't hiding. They were ready. "Command, this is Rescue 1. We have armed resistance. Repeat, armed resistance. Request immediate tactical support." The response came instantly. "Rescue 1, maintain surveillance altitude. Intercept package is 12 minutes out." That package was the USS Porter. At 2:51 p.m., the destroyer came into visual range. 509 feet of American naval power cutting through Lake Superior's cold waters at 31 knots. On its deck, a U.S. Navy SEAL team prepared for what they trained for but hoped they'd never face: boarding a hostile vessel against armed opposition, with children in the crossfire. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood with her team in the mission briefing room. 8 operators, the best of the best, but the odds weren't in their favor. "Thermal imaging shows approximately 120 heat signatures in the lower cargo hold," she said, pointing to the screen. "Clustered in 2 separate compartments. No movement. That means they're contained." One SEAL raised his hand. "Rules of engagement?" Chen's expression hardened. "Protect the children first. Neutralize any threat that prevents rescue. We don't leave without them." The team nodded. No more questions. At 3:07 p.m., the USS Porter drew alongside the MV Northern Star. A voice boomed across the water through speakers powerful enough to rattle windows. "This is the United States Navy. You are ordered to cut engines and prepare to be boarded." This is not a request. For 11 seconds, nothing happened. Then the mercenaries on deck raised their weapons. Share this so more people understand what our service members face to protect the innocent. The first shots came from the cargo vessel. Muzzle flashes lit the deck. Rounds ricocheted off the Porter's armored superstructure. One SEAL took cover as a bullet whined past his head. The destroyer's response was immediate. M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns opened up with controlled bursts. Not to kill, to suppress, to create an opening. Two rigid-hull inflatable boats launched from the Porter's stern. SEALs aboard each boat moved with practiced precision. The RHIBs cut across the water gap in seconds, slamming against the cargo vessel's hull. Grappling hooks flew upward, ropes pulled taut. Men climbed like shadows ascending into chaos. The first SEAL over the rail took fire immediately. He rolled right, returned fire, and dropped one hostile with two center-mass shots. Another mercenary turned, rifle raising. He never completed the move. A second SEAL put him down before he could fire. Deck is hot, multiple hostiles moving to secure entry points. The mercenaries weren't amateurs. They fell back in coordinated teams, covering each other, using cargo containers as cover, forcing the SEALs to clear every angle. But the SEALs had one advantage the mercenaries didn't. They knew exactly where the children were. At 3:19 p.m., a four-man element breached the main cargo hold access. The door was locked from inside, reinforced steel, no easy entry. Breaching charge, stand clear. The explosion was surgical, controlled. Just enough to blow the lock without compromising the structure below. The door flew open, smoke billowed out, and what the SEALs saw stopped them cold. Rows of children, ages ranging from 7 to 16, sitting in silence against the bulkhead. Duct tape over their mouths, zip ties on their wrists, eyes wide with terror. One SEAL knelt immediately. "We're United States military. You're safe. We're getting you out." But before they could move, gunfire erupted from the opposite bulkhead. Two mercenaries had taken defensive positions inside the hold, using the children as human shields. Comment save them if you want to see how this ends. The next 90 seconds were the longest of Lieutenant Commander Chen's career. Her team couldn't return fire, not without risking the children. The mercenaries knew it. They pressed the advantage, moving between cargo containers, forcing the SEALs into impossible decisions. Chen made the call. "Rescue 2, we need suppression on the port side. Drive them away from the kids." Above deck, the second SEAL team moved into position. Flashbangs deployed through ventilation shafts. The explosions inside the cargo hold were deafening, disorienting, exactly as intended. The mercenaries stumbled, vision whited out, balance gone. The SEALs moved instantly, close quarters combat, hand-to-hand when necessary. Both hostiles were subdued within 8 seconds. Hold secure. Repeat, hold is secure. Beginning evacuation. The children were moved in groups, carefully, gently. SEALs spoke in calm voices, despite the adrenaline still flooding their systems. "You're okay. We've got you. Just stay with us." By 3:34 p.m., all 120 children were aboard the USS Porter, wrapped in thermal blankets, medical personnel checking each one for injuries, Coast Guard helicopters inbound to transport the most vulnerable to hospitals. On the bridge of the Porter, the captain watched the MV Northern Star drift powerless in the water. Engines disabled, hostile forces neutralized, evidence secured. He picked up the radio. "Federal Command, this is USS Porter. Mission accomplished. All children recovered. Repeat, all children safe." Inside the Minneapolis Operations Center, 87 federal agents erupt in cheers. But Special Agent Reeves didn't celebrate, because he knew this was only the beginning. If you made it this far, you're part of the small percentage who actually care. Hit like and comment justice below. By 4:47 p.m., the children were being processed through medical screening at Coast Guard Station Duluth. Every child had a story, some too horrifying to speak aloud. A 12-year-old girl from St. Paul, missing for 7 months. Her parents had reported her disappearance 214 days ago. Police filed the report, but in a system overwhelmed with missing children cases, he became a statistic. Until today, a 14-year-old boy from Rochester, taken from a group home. His file listed him as a runaway. He wasn't. He'd been sold. A 9-year-old girl from Duluth. Her family thought she was at a cultural summer program. The program didn't exist, but the paperwork looked perfect. Signed by community leaders, approved by officials who had been bribed by Amina Hassan Yusuf. As federal investigators interviewed each child, the pattern became undeniable. This wasn't opportunistic. This was industrial. Recruiters identified vulnerable children, group homes, foster systems, immigrant families without legal resources, kids who wouldn't be missed immediately, or whose disappearances could be explained away. Then came the grooming, cultural programs, educational opportunities, a chance for a better life. Parents signed consent forms. Because they trusted the letterhead, they trusted the diplomatic seals, they trusted institutions that had been corrupted from within. By 6:15 p.m., federal prosecutors had compiled preliminary victim statements from 73 of the 120 children. What they described matched trafficking patterns seen in international operations. But this wasn't international. This was Minnesota, and it had been happening in plain sight for more than a decade. Share this video so more parents understand the warning sign. While children were being cared for, federal agents executed a second wave of raids. Targets had been identified during the initial investigation. Now it was time to dismantle the entire network. At 7:22 p.m., FBI teams hit an apartment complex in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. The residence belonged to Hassan Ibrahim Dirie, listed as a community outreach coordinator for the Somali Cultural and Diplomatic Services. What agents found inside made it clear he was no coordinator. 4 laptops containing encrypted communications, burner phones still active with messages in code, packages ready for transport, buyers confirmed for Friday delivery, inventory secured in safe location, packages, buyers, inventory, the language of trafficking, clinical, dehumanizing, efficient. Dirie was arrested without resistance. He said nothing, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't ask what the charges were, just stared at the wall with the blank expression of someone who'd always known this day would come. At 7:58 p.m., DEA agents breached a warehouse in the Seward neighborhood, listed as a cultural artifacts storage facility. There were no artifacts inside. What they found instead was a processing center, partitioned rooms with locks on the outside, mattresses on concrete floors, a kitchen area with industrial-sized food storage, and in the back office, files, manila folders containing photographs, names, ages, physical descriptions, medical information. 311 children, all missing, all from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, North and South Dakota, all cataloged like products in a warehouse inventory system. The special agent in charge of the raid, a 19-year DEA veteran named Thomas Vega, stood in that back office and felt something he rarely experienced in his career: pure rage. Bag every piece of paper, every hard drive, every scrap of evidence. These bastards are never seeing daylight again. Type accountability if you believe justice must be served. By 9:43 p.m., federal agents had executed raids at 14 locations across Minneapolis-St. Paul. 23 arrests, 74 kilograms of narcotics seized, $11.7 million in cash recovered, and evidence of systematic corruption that reached into places no one wanted to look. Because Amina Hassan Yusuf hadn't built this network alone. She'd had help from people with authority, people with access, people who were supposed to protect the vulnerable. The evidence found in her office painted a devastating picture. Payment records showing $847,000 transferred to Minneapolis City Council member James Kowalski over 7 years, labeled as campaign donations and community support funding. In exchange, Kowalski fast-tracked permits for buildings used as trafficking waypoints. He blocked investigations into missing children cases. He provided early warnings when federal agencies started asking questions. His arrest came at 10:12 p.m. Federal agents found him at a fundraising dinner. They walked him out in handcuffs in front of 200 donors. Then there was Hennepin County Child Protective Services Supervisor Linda Morrison. Her bank records showed $623,000 in deposits from shell accounts linked to Amina's network. Morrison had access to foster care records, vulnerable children without family support. She provided names, addresses, psychological profiles, intelligence that traffickers used to select targets. Her arrest at 10:47 p.m. sent shockwaves through the child welfare system. And perhaps most devastating was Minnesota State Court Judge Daniel Osman, a respected jurist, 22 years on the bench, known for his work on children's advocacy cases. He'd been taking money from Amina Hassan Yusuf since 2019, $1.2 million in offshore accounts. In exchange, he dismissed cases, sealed records, blocked subpoenas, used his judicial authority to protect a trafficking network. His arrest at 11:33 p.m. shattered any remaining illusions about how deep the corruption reached. Share this so more people understand that evil doesn't always hide in shadows. By 1:47 a.m., the Federal Operations Center was still running at full capacity. Agents worked through exhaustion. Because they knew the clock was still ticking, Amina Hassan Yusuf remained at large. Every airport, every border crossing, every port, alerts had been issued nationwide. Interpol had been notified, but Amina had 19 hours head start, and people with diplomatic connections know how to disappear. At 2:04 a.m., a tip came through the FBI's national hotline. A flight attendant at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. She'd been watching the news, and she remembered something from her shift the previous morning. A woman matching Amina's description, but traveling under a different name. Diplomatic passport, priority boarding on a flight to Toronto. Federal agents pulled security footage immediately. There she was, calm, composed, walking through the terminal like she had every right to be there. Because until 5:03 a.m. yesterday, she did. At 2:19 a.m., FBI agents contacted Canadian Border Services. Amina had entered Canada on diplomatic credentials, but she hadn't stayed. 4 hours after landing in Toronto, she'd boarded another flight. Destination: Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with a connecting flight to Mogadishu, Somalia. She was running for a country with no extradition treaty. At 2:37 a.m. the U.S. Department of State issued an emergency diplomatic cable. Amina Hassan Yusuf's credentials were revoked. An international arrest warrant was issued, and the Somali government was formally notified that harboring her would be considered a hostile act. At 4:52 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the raid began, Amina's flight landed in Mogadishu. Somali National Intelligence Service agents were waiting. She was arrested on the tarmac. Extradition proceedings began immediately. 2 weeks later, Amina Hassan Yusuf was returned to the United States in federal custody. Comment caught: if you believe justice delayed is not justice denied. The trial began 4 months later. Federal prosecutors presented 1,347 pieces of evidence: financial record, communications, victim testimony, statements from the 120 children rescued from the cargo vessel. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Amina Hassan Yusuf was convicted on 47 federal charges: conspiracy to traffic children, money laundering, narcotics distribution, corruption of public officials, use of diplomatic status to facilitate criminal enterprise. Her sentence: life in federal prison without possibility of parole. City Council member James Kowalski, 28 years. CPS Supervisor Linda Morrison, 35 years. Judge Daniel Osman, 40 years. And disbarment: Hassan Ibrahim Dirie and 19 other network members, sentences ranging from 15 to 50 years. Total asset seizures from the network: $186 million. Every penny earmarked for victim compensation and child trafficking prevention programs. But the numbers tell only part of the story. Because 120 children came home, 120 lives were saved, 120 futures were reclaimed from darkness. Every child received comprehensive support services: medical care, psychological counseling, educational assistance, family reunification when possible, foster care placement when necessary. And the investigation continues. Because while Amina's network was dismantled, federal agencies know networks like this rarely operate in isolation. The evidence seized revealed connections to trafficking operations in 11 other states. Investigations are ongoing. More arrests are expected. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This case exposed something Americans must understand. Evil doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always hide in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it carries diplomatic credentials. Sometimes it hides behind charity work and community programs. Amina Hassan Yusuf built an empire by exploiting the exact systems designed to protect the vulnerable. She weaponized trust. She corrupted institutions. She used America's own infrastructure against its children, and she almost succeeded. But she didn't. Because federal agents refused to look away. Because Coast Guard crews risked their lives. Because Navy SEALs executed a perfect rescue. Because ordinary citizens like that flight attendant saw something and said something. 120 children are alive today because people chose to act. This case should serve as a permanent reminder. Oversight matters. Accountability matters. Vigilance matters. Trust is essential in a functioning society, but trust without verification is vulnerability waiting to be exploited. Every nonprofit should face regular audits. Every diplomatic credential should come with limitations. Every child welfare system should have external oversight, and every citizen should understand that protection doesn't come from assuming good intentions. It comes from asking difficult questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable. Comment accountability. If you agree that systems built on trust must also be built on oversight, if you made it to the end, you're part of the 1% who don't look away. You understand that these stories matter, that exposing darkness is the first step toward preventing it. Hit like if you believe justice is worth fighting for. Comment justice if you stand with the agents who risked everything. Subscribe so you never miss updates on cases like this. And share this video, not for views, not for algorithms. Share it so more people understand how deeply these networks can penetrate. Share it so more parents know the warning sign. Share it so more officials understand the consequences of corruption. Because this wasn't just a rescue operation. This was a warning that evil adapts, that it finds new methods, new disguises, new vulnerabilities to exploit. The fight isn't over. It never is. But today, 120 children are safe. Today, a network was destroyed. Today, justice was served, and that's a victory worth remembering. The case of Amina Hassan Yusuf and the Minneapolis trafficking network will be studied for decades in law enforcement academies, in diplomatic training programs, in child welfare conferences, not as a failure, but as a lesson about what happens when systems become complacent, when credentials replace scrutiny, when reputation shields criminality, and a lesson about what's possible when good people refuse to accept evil as inevitable. This is only the beginning. Stay vigilant, stay informed, stay engaged, because the next network is already out there, already operating, already waiting for someone to notice. Will you be that someone? Hit like, comment, subscribe, share, and never look away.